I think the main message that we have is none of these cars are automated or autonomous by far. I think I don't have to explain you, the OEMs, I think you're all with me on this. But it's the consumer perception which we have to try to learn what these systems are capable of doing. In my presentation, I want to give you a bit more background on the results and the tests we have done and how we came to these overall results and what we can see on the test track later on while driving these to give us a bit of a flavor on where the strategies are from different OEMs, because even though the main conclusion is you should drive yourself with the help of the car, they're not all helping you in the same manner. And we want to highlight this with a couple of tests and showing the results. In our roadmap 2025, we specifically put automated drive it next to the current rating scheme. We didn't want to integrate it yet for several reasons, but mainly because these are upcoming technologies. We cannot apply, as Michiel said earlier, the standard fit approach we have, but we still believe that there's the time now to inform consumers on the capabilities of these systems of what they call automated driving, assisted driving only at the moment, and to make sure that people understand what they can do and moreover what they shouldn't do with these systems. We agreed in the board when discussing this topic that we should split it up into 3 elements. There's a system performance testing, again, which you will witness today, but also the HMI, which typically is minor elements in our protocols, suddenly becomes a very important element in automated driving because of keeping the driver engaged. How does he respond to the system performance, etc. And finally, and this is something that we do as Euro NCAP, we wanted to give a sort of a system grading, we call it. We had long debates and discussions on how we'd call it. We wouldn't call it rating, but a grading by giving some feel of where systems compare to each other on the highest level. And with this said, we started with highway assist systems, as we call them, because this is typically where vehicle handbooks indicate where these systems are. They're supporting you, and they're developed to do this on highways typically. So what have we done? We have split it up to 3 elements in principle. We have the human-machine interface interaction assessment, where we look at very simple things: the system name, official media, what does media show from the OEMs themselves, what type of features are part of the whole system. The one assisted drive system isn't the other one in terms of system features. And also what information is given in the user manual on the limitations of these systems. Are they very clear on where to use them, where not to use them? And then finally, we'll put this to the test on the 2 elements of assisted driving at the moment, level 2, if you wish, which is ACC, longitudinal control, and lane centering, the steering control. So in ACC, we are testing the vehicles in our standard tests: stationary car, slower moving car, and braking car, which you all know from the AEB testing we do. But also came up with 2 additional scenarios, which you saw in the film, that are very, very challenging and known to be very realistic, happening on every drive, at least I take, when going from the office and back. The so-called cut-in and also cut-out scenario. I think cut-out is a name we invented, so probably, hopefully people will adopt this and explains the situation. And then finally, in steering, we do 2 relatively simple tests where we do an obstacle avoidance to see what the cooperation between the 2 is, between the vehicle and the driver. And finally, steering in an S-curve, and of course I need to give you the footnote: don't do this at home, because it's hands-off driving, just to get an idea of the feeling on how much steering itself is done by the vehicle with the driver having no input. Again, this is not the intended use of these systems. So basing ourselves on a well-established protocol made it easier for us and also for our labs to verify this, because this is a well-known procedure with tools we already have. But of course, looking at highway assist systems, this is a different speed range we're talking about. Typically, an AEB FCW will go up to 50, 80 kph in the different scenarios. And in ACC, we took a very pragmatic approach, saying, right, you're using it on a highway. Typically in Europe, not here in Germany per se, we stop at 130 kph as a maximum speed for the system performances, while, of course, here you can have higher speeds to use the system. So again, really easy testing for us, knowing what we are, but then with ACC engaged in the test itself, rather than just looking at AEB FCW. For the cut-in and cut-out scenario, we looked at different times of cut-in, cut-out. Now, it may be just my colleague, fellow countrymen driving, they are very typical, cutting in front of you, giving less attention to the higher velocity car coming from behind. And that's where the cut-in scenario itself, I encountered myself every day I drive. People either don't see you, or they want you to take action because they expect you to respond to them cutting in. And that's relatively easy for a person, but to try to tell and have a system look at a situation building up is a relatively difficult thing to do. For the cutout scenario, it's a relatively challenging one. You may state that this is not something I encounter every day, true, but a variant of this is certainly more common than what we should see in real roads. And again, attentive drivers would have no problem with this at all, but expecting the system to do the same as a driver is a challenging bit. And that's where we'll give you some more results later on. In the steering control bit, we have two, again, very basic tests performed. So-called obstacle avoidance test, some people call it a pothole test, where typically because you have put the system on lane centering mode, it will follow the center of the lane. That's how they're designed, that's what you told them to do, and they will do it. You're driving, it will stay in the center, and what we wanted from these systems, because they're assisted systems, is the fact that if you want to avoid within your lane and deviate from this center path, we want the car to allow you, because again, all of the user manuals, etc., tell you, you are in control, you're driving, I'm helping you. And that's where we wanted to have a very basic test, right? What does the car do? Do I need a lot of force to get away from this middle line? Or is it relatively simple, and the car will then come back to me? And I'll show you a very high-level result of this later on. Again, for the steering control test, we did something which you shouldn't do with these systems, is hands-off driving. And this gave us an idea of what the level of steering support was. And this, I can tell you already, there's a huge difference between the different systems. Some will give you a high level of support and again tell you, all right, you told me to stay in the middle of the lane, I will do this. And others will tell you, I'll give you a hint where the road goes, but you're steering, so I'll just have, and I think I just learned last week a new term on this. It shouldn't call it steering assist, it's more a very advanced power steering that gives you a hint on where to go while driving. So these are all of the tests we've done, and we try to summarize this, and which is relatively difficult on this very delicate topic. What is good or bad? What is wrong? What is safe? What is not safe? And there is little to no real background there, apart from engineering judgment that we used. And I think typically Euro NCAP is pretty good at using engineering judgment and heading the correct way. So what we did in the datasheet, and I think you've all received the first page, is the high-level text results. But on the website there will be a 4-page PDF of every vehicle that will have 3 more elements, 3 pages in there. The second page will be the HMI, human-machine interaction page, which is a table summarizing these features that we are seeing on the vehicles, explaining what the user handbook has said about these systems. Are they clear enough in what the limitations are? But also a short graph of showing you what will the system do in case you are misusing it by trying to drive hands-off. And I'll show you the results of that later on. In ACC, we had a huge struggle to find a good way of indicating what the systems do, having the message in the background that more isn't always better, where we have now come up with a solution of a speedometer, which is of course very applicable to the automotive industry, is where we, with the yellow needle, indicate what is the ACC design speed. I must admit that we didn't do all of the single test speeds that are in our test matrix, so we relied on manufacturer information and then verified a couple of key elements of that to see whether the predictions they provided us are matching. What we also then wanted to do is have a link with our rating scheme where we have AEB performances, FCW performances as a sort of a safety net behind it. So we didn't only want to focus on the ACC performance, but also wanted to give a hint outside of the normal 80 kbh, as I indicated earlier, but on a higher speed range. What do the systems do? Do they still support you at a higher speed range? Which, of course, from a safety perspective, if they avoid it by AEB, it may not be very comfortable, but it's still safe in a way. And then next to the speedometer, but also for lane centering, steering assist systems, we wanted to give a sort of an overall judgment of that scenario by giving an element of indication that says the driver was primarily in control or the vehicle was primarily in control in this situation, where ultimately the best systems from our perspective are systems that do a good balance. The driver is aware of his role and the car gives him proper support. That's the ultimate balance that we want to see in these vehicles. But there's also an element in more challenging scenarios where there's no system response at all, which we also then, of course, need to indicate that there is no support at all from these systems, not even in the FCW AEB element. Now, with that said, I want to give you some high-level results that indicate the differences between these systems in general, starting with the human-machine interface. And before I do that, all of the cars we tested were 10 vehicles from the brands Audi, BMW, DS, Ford, Hyundai, Mercedes, Nissan, Tesla, Toyota, and Volvo. All of the cars are outside, and they are the models we actually tested. So we tested the Audi A6, we did a BMW 5 Series, a DS7 Crossback, we did a Ford Focus, the Hyundai NEXO, which probably a lot of people haven't seen yet, the Mercedes-Benz, the Nissan LEAF, the Tesla Model S, the Toyota Corolla, which isn't available yet in Europe, and the Volvo V60. So again, those vehicles are all outside, and I think you're all aware that you can do demo drives this afternoon after these presentations to experience these systems yourself on the track. Now, with that said, I'll give you a couple of highlights on a comparison. So in the system features element, half of the vehicles had a speed limit adaptation, meaning they will, as shown in the video, they will give you the option to adopt your set speed of your ACC to the speed limit he has identified. Now, this is very similar to what we do in the speed assist protocols, but then it's a combination with the speed limit information towards ACC. Fewer cars, they had speed adjustment for corners. They would identify a corner which they cannot take or you shouldn't be driving at a certain speed to enter this corner, so they will already slow down the vehicle a bit more before entering this. And there was also a low number of vehicles offering you assisted lane change. On the system name, we found some interesting elements where we, again, also there, we took a very pragmatic approach that because we're all agreeing that these are assist systems, we stated that we need the word assist in your system names. There's a couple of categories of these namings. There's also manufacturers that don't have an overall name of the system. There are some manufacturers that have a name which covers more than just the two elements we're trying to assess here. But at least there were 4 OEMs from our perspective that had a wrong name. A name that indicated pilot without adding the word assist to it. So DS has a system that called, I must forgot that one, DS, piloted assist, no pilot, something. It's in your data sheets. Ford had Copilot 360. Again, Copilot 360 doesn't indicate any wording saying assist. We have Nissan ProPilot, and we have Tesla Autopilot. Now, all of these system names do not indicate assistance. Now, already there is some response from the manufacturers. Nissan is indicating that they are highly considering to change the name, matching the American name is being ProPilot Assist, which then, of course, is especially what we want. It's not on the system name itself, but Volvo has indicated that all of the reference towards semi-autonomous in their text describing these names are also now removed from their websites to make clear that these are assist systems and not even close to being autonomous. In official media, we found, and this we really had the manufacturer provide us with their video of choice. We found 2 that we call, maybe it's a strong wording, misleading. The BMW film, in short, shows you, and you can click on it in the data sheet as well, it shows you the driver taking his hands off the wheel and putting them on the lap. And I think that's something that we do not allow. There is assistance, and even if you text, it says, or in the voiceover it says, the vehicle takes over control, and then the driver puts his hands on his lap, which, again, it's an assist system, don't do this. Tesla, the official film we use for Tesla is correct, but if you go to the Autopilot page of Tesla, so just simply on tesla.com, Autopilot, the only film you'll see, which is highlighted, is a completely hands-off driver, which may be a future development of the Autopilot system, but it's certainly, from our perspective, misleading in giving the wrong impression of what the system can do today, or should be used today. Then finally, on the hands-off warning sequence, there were different elements, different times of when the audio-visual warning pops up, or whether there's a haptic feedback, etc. But the biggest conclusion we draw here is that half of the vehicles simply shut down the system. So if you do not engage, you do not put your hands back on the wheel and give some steering input, which is the typical one that you need to do, they will simply shut down the system. Now, this may be a strategy which is okay if you know the driver is in the loop, but if he's ill and is not able to do this, you're not supporting him, you just leave him alone. And this is something, again, which I don't think is the very best solution to incorporate this. Other half did a controlled stop. So they indicate you, and as soon as they know you're not engaged anymore, and you're not willing to engage, they will stop the vehicle and make it come to a standstill, which may not be the ultimate goal, but it is certainly best way forward, that taking away their speed, that you're not crashing into anything in front of you at all. And of course, this will not be very comfortable either, so you're not going to rely on this and go to this level. Going into the adaptive cruise control tests, which show you a lot more differentiation about the systems, and I tried to cluster them in a way that indicates how these systems perform differently. We start with a slower moving car in front, and I think this is where an ACC is designed for. It's designed to work with moving obstacles because it's relatively easy and robustly to verify robustly that there's a car in front of you, and then you can respond to this in a more robust way. So looking at the cars, these are let's say, the least performance in ACC at the lowest speed level, and I must admit that, speaking of BMW, correct me if I'm wrong, this is an intention. It's not that they are not able or willing to do this. This is their design philosophy on these systems. But compared to the US, they up to 90 kph, they give you, and that's with a 20 kph target, it's around 70 kph speed differential, they will give you full ACC support. So it's a comfortable ride, and it will hook up to the vehicle in front. At higher speeds, so higher differential speeds, they still offer you a good FCW/AEB emergency intervention for the driver to be indicated that this is something happening. Please respond, and gives you a feedback of what you should do as a driver. There is 4 other vehicles, Audi, Ford, Toyota, and Volvo, that do it very similar thing. They do support you at the full speed range in terms of emergency support, but do a bit more in the ACC level. And finally, there's 4 others that do the full speed range in ACC, so comfortable braking. And this is where we would classify, in this specific scenario, as being the vehicle is primarily in control. If this would be your normal drive, you do not encounter anything else, you may think that you are in an automated vehicle. Now again, this is not the only situation you will encounter, so it's balanced overall with different performances in different scenarios. But this is where ACC is good at. On the other hand, and it's not only in ACC, but I think we see the same difficulty in AEB testing, a stationary car in front is more challenging. It's not said that the cars will not see it, but it takes more time, or it's programmed not to always brake for the stationary targets because of also false positive assessments. Now there's 4 cars, the DS, Audi, BMW, and Nissan, that do relatively low speeds in terms of ACC braking for these stationary vehicles. And they also, in terms of providing you with AEB FCW support, they only go up to around 80 kph. And 80 kph is a typical speed differential number, which you can see overall. Where above that, so if you drive it to a target at 90 kph, and don't do this today, you will see no system response whatsoever. It will not warn you, it will not brake, it will not do anything. I think that's where we would say at least we want to see you cover the whole speed range. And this is what the other cars are doing, well, nearly doing in the Hyundai case. It's where the Toyota, Hyundai, and Volvo have a similar ACC level in terms of stationary target, ACC performance, but they do cover you and provide you with forward collision warning at the minimum, or even some AEB intervention to a higher speed range. There's the Ford and the Mercedes that give you even more ACC support at the beginning, but again also cover the full speed range by providing you with AEB FCW support. And finally, there's a Tesla that does the full speed range on the stationary target. And I must state here as well, we tried on a test track whether we could cheat the system. It works on a straight road. When the car is very clear, it's in my path. But if you take, for instance, the S-band, and you put the target in the S-band, it, of course, also for Tesla, it's not a magic vehicle. It has to identify, this is in my path, so I need to brake for it. So even there, and this is then a test result versus maybe different than what you see in real life, it will not do the full speed range either. But this is what came out of our tests. And again, for Tesla, we would then state that this is the vehicle primarily in control in this test scenario. For the cut-in, cut-out, this is really the challenging situation where you can see all of the cars fail or not making it if you see the test as being an ACC test, passing or failing. So in the cut-in scenario, only 4 cars were able to give you some support. Again, we classify then this as being the vehicle being, the driver being primarily in control with some support of the vehicle. But 6 vehicles did not give any response in the cut-in scenario. Now, I must also admit that the cut-in scenarios we tested are relatively challenging. They're very late interventions or cut-in scenarios. But this is what happens. And if you encountered normal cut-ins and think, well, my car does everything perfectly, I can tell you in a more critical cut-in, it won't. It will simply either not support you at all or give you a hint of support. So pay attention as a driver. Finally, the cut-out scenario, there was one car, the Audi, that gives a bit more support in the cutout. It responds relatively quickly to the situation, to the exposed vehicle. That's why we classified that one as being a balanced approach. The vast majority is, again, giving you some support, and that's more in relation. It's a very complex stationary target, if you would like to see it like that, where they give you some support, but certainly not sufficiently, so minor support, and the driver has to avoid the situation himself by definition. And there were 3 vehicles also in the cutout scenario where there were no support at all, not even from ACC nor AEB. So this is really showing consumers, this is the message that we try to give them, don't rely on these systems. These are day-to-day scenarios where the systems are not responding. Now, not blaming the vehicles that they don't get me wrong here. Because you are, and this is what consumers should understand, you are in control, you're driving, you should have seen the situation build up anyway, but don't wait until the vehicle responds to it. Take your own action way ahead before the vehicle does anything. And finally, steering assist. I mentioned the so-called pothole test or the obstacle avoidance test, where Tesla stands out. All of the cars will allow you to avoid the obstacle, and then the support will try to bring you back into the middle of the lane, because that's what it's told to do. But it will allow you to override, if you call it overriding, or at least cooperatively steer around something while the system still supports you. And if you then reduce, as a driver, reduce your steering input, it will bring you back into the lane. Now that is how we would expect the system to work as an assist system. Tesla has a special approach that if you do a certain steering input yourself, it will disengage. And to us, this feels like the car is saying, well, you drive or I drive, but we're not doing this together. And that's something that we want to avoid, especially because we're discussing assist systems where everybody and all manufacturers state clearly in the handbook, you as a driver are in control, you are driving, I'm just supporting you. And to us, the strategy of disengaging while there's any driver input doesn't match up with this expectation of being a support system. Then nextly, and again, Tesla stands out as being a vehicle that takes a different approach than the others in terms of steering assist. In the S-band, they would simply follow the middle of the lane completely. They will do all of the steering, even if you take your hands off just before you enter the S-band. And this is, again, a hint towards the consumer that the car can do everything himself. Don't work with me, I'll do it for you. And that's what we don't want. Now, it's not said, by the way, that the other cars are not avoiding and staying in lane, but they're doing it less comfortably. And please note that the lines you see are all of the other 9 cars. They are the middle of the lane. So if you're close to, I'm not sure if this works now. If you're close to the dash line, that means half of your car is actually outside of the lane. It will still give you support and try to bring you back to the lane you want, but it doesn't do all of the steering itself. And again, this is hands-off driving. Don't ever do this. So cooperatively, you should follow the Tesla line, being in the middle of the lane, because that's what we as drivers are intended to do. We should be staying in the lane. That's what at least I was taught when driving. And all of the others will give you support and try to keep you in the middle, but they will not do everything for you. And that's why we classified all but Tesla as being a balanced approach, where the driver has a clear understanding that this car won't do everything for me, so I'll better steer myself as well. Summarizing everything, we have classified the DS and BMW as being the vehicle's primary control with some help of the vehicle. We have Tesla on the other side, where we believe the vehicle is primarily in control and the driver is monitoring, which we are not very good at, or at least he is less important in our test scenarios. And the vast majority of vehicles as being classified as being balanced. They give a good level of support, but they also make clear to consumers, well, I'm not doing everything, I'm merely there to support you and drive you. So this is the overall summary that we have and can offer you today on the 10 vehicles outside, and please test them yourself and give your own opinion about how they perform and whether we were right or wrong on this. So of course it doesn't stop with this event. I think it's a challenging task for us ahead, learning a lot doing all of these tests. And I think what we need to do now is we need to continue on the 3 elements we had in the system performance test, review the test results we have, seeing whether the test scenarios we have are correct and covering everything we want, or whether we need to add or remove some. Also, there's a big challenge still on including a better HMI assessment to see what elements in terms of takeover requests, warning times, etc., are being implemented or should be implemented, and when we can put requirements on, clear design requirements for manufacturers to take into account in the future. And there's still a heavy task for us, similar to what I presented in the last slide, is to show how do we classify these systems and how can we give a bit more consumer information about the safety of these systems, which is also a challenging task because they are not per se a safety element. It's hard to find the safety aspect of these systems, although we strongly believe in the safety benefit by having more distance to the car in front, but also to having more relaxed driving because you know the car is supporting you while driving and takes away a bit of your task. So with that said, I want to thank you for your attention and hope you can all have time this afternoon to look at the vehicles outside.